All right, so travel season is upon us. We've got summer. A lot of people are going to be going on different trips and vacations, and a lot of that's going to be done in a car. So my project for today that I want to share with you all is the travel pillowcase. And this pillowcase will fit a 12 by 16 travel pillow. And what we need for this is what it's going to look like. So you have the body, a trim, and a hem. And so the measurements for those are, I'm gonna throw some new fabric in here. All right, so your main body of fabric, there it is going to be 16 inches this way by 27 and a half this way. Let me get that out of the way so you can see. So 16 by 27 and a half. That is for the main body of the pillowcase. Then you need, for the hem, you need a 9-inch by 27 and a half inch for the hem. And last but not least, you need a 1.5-inch strip by 27 and a half inches. So again, 9 by 27 and a half, 1.5 inches by 27 and a half. And our main body fabric is 16 by 27 and a half. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to our ironing board, and we're going to take our little 1.5-inch strip, and we're going to put it wrong sides together, and we're going to press that in half all the way down the length of the 27 and a half inch strip. So as you can see, I've already done that. So now the first thing that we're going to do when we get started here is we're going to take our hem. Okay, there we go. We've got our hem. And this is going to be right side up. So as you can see, right side up. I'm going to take my body fabric, here it is, and I'm going to lay that and line up my side edges and my top edges with my hem fabric. So if I pull this back, there it is, and there's my hem fabric. And then last but not least, I'm going to take my trim piece, and I'm going to line those raw edges. And remember, it's a double edge here. We're going to line those up with the raw edges. All right, so what you need to do now is we are going to pin these three together or glue. Now, I will tell you, for any little kiddo that would like to learn how to sew or have a 4-H project or something, this little project is a really great starter project. And the reason that I like it for that is everything is a straight seam. It's not a huge project, and it's relatively easy. If you're going to work with kids, one of the things that I think works really well is this glue. You can actually glue your layers together here. And this is one of my favorite glue products. It's by Acorn, and it's called the Seam Align Gentle Hold Fabric Glue. And so the thing I like about it is it works. It holds everything together. And if you're working with kids, they are not going to be poking themselves with a pin, which a lot of times that turns them off from sewing, depending on how young they are. So to do that, all you have to do is you're just going to slide over this way just a hair so you can see. So we're going to do all of my layers. So we're just going to lift that up, and I'm just going to put just a dab of glue right along here, about every inch. And I'm going to take my top or my body fabric, and I'm just going to give that a press and push that together so that they're being held. And I'll come back and do my little hem. I really like doing this at the ironing board, because then what I do is as soon as I glue a section, then I will go back and I will hit it with the iron, and it dries the glue faster, which I like because I am always in a hurry. So let's line this up. Okay, slide this down. Okay, and I like to hold on to where we're at the last blue spot I made. So we're just gonna go along here. Put this back. Okay. All right, we're just going to press that in place with our fingers. There we go. And we're going to do the same thing with our little hem. So let's go back up here and start gluing. And if you don't want to mess with the glue, that's fine. You can just go and pin. So we're just going to, again, line this up right along the raw edges here and push that down. But I really would recommend just going ahead and doing this on your ironing board, because it'll get that glue to dry much faster. Okay, coming back, line that up, press it down. See. Right. There we go. All right, so there is our 3 layers are together. So now what we're going to do is, this method of making this pillowcase is called the burrito method, and this is why. So we're going to take this lower edge, because remember, here's our 16-inch this way by 27.5. We're going to take this, and we are just going to roll that up just like we were rolling and making a burrito. We're only going to go up so far. We don't need to go all the way to the top. And then we're going to take the bottom edge of our hem, and we're going to line it up with our top edge here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the camera back down so you can see. So now I can go back and I can glue this one as well, but I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to pin. And so all of my layers are now going to be held together. They're nice and even. Okay, so there we have. It's all pinned. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the sewing machine and we are going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance right along the edge that you have just pinned or glued, whichever method you preferred. So 1/4 inch seam allowance all down the length of our pillowcase. Okay, so we've sewn our tube. I don't know if you can see that. It's a little bit difficult to see, but I've sewn my tube 1/4 inch along that long edge. And now what we're going to do is, this is the fun part. And truthfully, if kids are doing this, this is the thing that they think is really cool. You're going to just reach your hand inside and work your way over to the other side of the pillowcase hem. And you see this that's hanging out here. We're just going to take that and we're going to put it down inside there. I don't know if you can see that well. And we're just going to turn this now and pull all of that through our little hem. And for that, we say, ta-da, there we are. So our pillowcase has now been turned right side out. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we are going to press our hem down right along our seam allowance to make sure it's nice and flat. But before we do that, if you would like, let me get close so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Our little hem here is just kind of floating out there, right? So the thing is, you may want to actually iron this down, and you may want to go back and stitch right along this edge so that the pillowcase trim doesn't turn and get weird when the pillowcase is washed. So I'm going to do that for you all so that you can see what I'm talking about. But first, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to press my seams flat. Okay, so I have my wool pressing mat. And you might be wondering, well, that doesn't look like a wool pressing mat. Well, I have to tell you, I take old pillowcases and I put my wool pressing mat, or if I have another press pad of any kind, I actually take those and I put them inside of an old pillowcase because I use a lot of starch and I don't want my wool pressing mat to get gunked up with the starch. And so I put an old pillowcase over it to protect it from getting too clogged up with starch. And that kind of keeps the mat clean. And when my pillowcase gets gunky, then all I have to do is take it off, throw it in the wash it and put it back on. So that is, I do have a wool pressing mat. Let me just quickly show you. There he is. I actually have a wool pressing mat inside of my pillowcase. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start with the inside hem of our pillowcase here. And I've got my spray. And I'm just going to take my little Olaso iron. And I'm just going to, do you see how I'm kind of like pulling on that top part there? And I'm pulling on that hem, so I am right up against the stitches. Let me go ahead and pull my camera down a little bit more. This dark brown is hard to see on, and I apologize for that, but I absolutely love this fabric. It's the National Park fabric by Riley Blake, and that we do have that in stock. All right, so here we go. We're going to pull, and I'm just going to get that right up against the stitching. And then that way, I'll make sure that I don't have any kind of little puckers in my hem. So there's one side. So now we're going to turn it over. And I want you to remember that this side is going to need a press as well. See how much of that was hung over there? So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to spray this, but we're going to make sure that our little hem stays towards the body or your main fabric. So we're going to just do the same thing. I'm going to pull this back. I'm going to make sure my little trim stays flat. Whoops, there he wiggled on me, so we're going to fix that. Let's slide him down here. Go ahead and pull him back a little bit anyway. Okay. All right, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to actually iron right along the edge of my hem. So we're just going to give that a spritz too. I have to tell you, I love spray starch because it makes everything behave. All right, so there we go. We're just going to press that right along there. I do have a little wrinkle there, so we're going to press that out of there. If I need to, we'll just blast it again with some starch. And get that nice and flat. Okay, so there we have our little hem has been pressed in place. And now I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew right along that edge so y'all can see why that's important, because in that way, again, when you wash, it's not going to flip up and not be where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch that down, and I'm going to put just right along that edge. All right, so I have actually stitched down that little edge, and it's hard to see on this one. So I have another one, another sample here. I think this is the cutest fabric, but can you all see let me get real close so you can see it. There it is. You can see the stitching right along the edge, and that's going to hold your trim in place during use or during the wash. So either one, but I like doing that on my pillowcases. All right, so I have to tell you, I love this pillowcase. I think that fabric is so cute for kids, and it's been very popular at the store. All right, so our next thing that we're going to be doing is this. We're going to be making French seams on our pillowcase. And a French seam is when the seam raw edge is stitched inside of the hem, or this, not hem. It's when, let me start again. A French seam is when the raw edges of the seam allowance are folded back into the seam allowance and stitched inside of it, so there is no raveling whatsoever. So this is, the pillowcase I showed you at the beginning. Let me flip this right side out, wrong side out, so you can see what I'm talking about as far as a French seam goes. All right, so this is a French seam. So as you can see the stitching here, right along the edge, but you can also see where the stitching that was the first seam allowance, you can see where that edge is, and that raw edge of your seam allowance is now actually stitched inside this little, I'm going to call it a little casing. Not quite a casing, but yeah, I think it's a casing. And so as you can see, there are no raw edges on the inside of this pillowcase. And that is especially helpful for anything that is going to get a lot of washings, like a pillowcase. You're not going to have the seam allowances getting all ragged because they are sealed off and they're not able to be messed with. So how we're going to do that is this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our pillowcase and we're going to fold it wrong sides together and line up our side seam and where our top seam is going to be. And so I'm going to pay close attention to right here where my, let me get closer, right here where my little trims meet on the side. So we're going to pin that. And as you can see, I want to make sure that my end of my hem are lined up. So this is going to be the first thing that I pin in place. And again, if you're working with kids, you can use the fabric glue here. Right, and I'm going to make sure that this is even. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance across the top and down the side. Okay, so I have stitched the top and the side of my pillowcase 1/4 inch seam allowance. So just want to let you see that there. Before we turn our pillowcase wrong side out, we need to trim our corners so that we'll have a point, a nice sharp point. So what we're going to do is we're just going to, you don't want to get too close to this because when we turn it and poke it right side out, we don't want to poke a hole there. And so I cut across the top there, but then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trim away a little bit of this seam allowance in both corners here, both sides, because I want to make sure that the when I turn that it's not real bulky and thick here. The other place that we're going to trim is we're going to trim right here in this corner. I want to trim just a little bit away from him too. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that thread. All right. All right, so got my ironing pad back here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our pillowcase and we're going to turn it wrong side out. All right, there we go. And then I like to use my clover point turner. And I'm going to go over here to my corners. And first off, I'm going to poke those out. So you can see I got that poked out nice. And then the other thing that I like to do is when I'm using the point turner is on a seam allowance like this, I want to make sure that that seam allowance is pushed up right against the edge of the stitching. So I'm just going to take my point turner, and do you see? Let me see if I can get a little closer so you can see it. All right, so we're right here. So my point turner, you can see it's running right along my stitching line. Go. We're going to go all the way along that edge. There we are. And we're going to do the same thing along our side seam. So here we are, we're right there at the edge. There's my stitching line. We're going to run right along that edge, just like so. And the reason that I like to do this is I want to make sure that that seam allowance is pushed over right where it needs to be, and that there aren't any like little puckers or pleats in that seam allowance as I get ready to sew this. Because remember, we're making a French seam here, and I want to make sure that I don't have pleats in the seam allowance, which would take up space out of my pillowcase. So if we had too many of those, what would happen is your pillowcase might not fit your fabric. All right, now that's a little bulky right there, but we're just going to keep pushing on it. You can see I can just barely work that. That's okay. Right, we're just going to run that right along that seam allowance. Okay, then I'm going to take my handy dandy starch. And I've already made that pretty flat there, but now I'm just going to go along and I'm going to press that. So it stays right where I want it. You see why? I mean, I've got starch all over that pillowcase now. Right. Sure, he's where I want it to be. All right, so I've pressed that, and the nice thing is it's pretty flat. If you needed to, before you went and stitched this, you could actually just take a few pins and pin them so that that whole section kind of stays in place and it's not going to shift around. All right, now this seam, because remember, we're trying to encase the seam that we just stitched, that was 1/4 of an inch. We're trying to encase that into this seam allowance that we're fixing to stitch. So this one, we're going to stitch this seam allowance at 3/8 of an inch. And that will give us plenty for that inner 1/4 inch seam allowance to be inside of this 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to go and stitch that one. Okay, so there is my 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to use this other piece. I hope that you can see what I am going to show you, because this I think helps with the explanation. All right, so here is my 3/8 inch seam allowance here. Do you see those two little, there is those two little things that are inside there? That was that 1/4 inch seam that we made when the pillowcase was turned with the wrong sides together, and we did that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Here they are, and as you can see, they are enclosed inside my 3/8 inch hem. So the beauty of this is now the whole pillowcase, all the raw edges are now inside that second seam that we made. So now what we need to do is we're going to turn this guy right side out. So we're just going to reach in, flip him right sides out. Grab our handy dandy point turner. Poke him out. Do both corners. And then guess what? We are going to do the exact same thing that we did earlier by running that point turner right along the seam allowance that we just stitched. Go. Now I'm going to tell you, on this one side over here, it is a pretty bulky seam allowance. So as you can see, he's pretty chubby right there. But the thing is that he is laying down. So here we go. We're going to do the same thing down the side. And sometimes you get these little funky strings, as you can see, they're just kind of hanging out there. So just take your scissors and nip those off. I always wait and do that when I have it all pressed, just to make sure I've got them all out there. So here we go. Let's run our. Another thing you are able to do as well, if you don't want to use the point turner, you can actually take your iron, expose your seam allowance. So there it is. And you want to make sure that the seam allowance is all going the same direction. So just reach up in there and make sure mine's going over to this side. So you can just take your spray and take your iron and run it right along where the seam is. And do that. That's easy. Let's do that again right here. Well, we didn't do too bad lining our little spaces up here. Let's go ahead and do up here. Just make sure that your seam allowance is all going the same way. And because I use the point turner on here, I'm just going to mist that. Make sure that that is right up against the stitching, so there's no pleats or puckers. That's nicely pressed. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and press this whole thing. There we go. Get out of the way. And here is our cute little travel pillowcase. There is a second size of the pillowcase. Okay, so there is our finished pillowcase. The thing I really like about making these little travel pillowcases is the fact that they make great gifts, and you can tailor them to whoever you're making them for. So I think this one is super cute, perfect for anybody who loves to travel. This fabric is actually the national parks fabric. And so if you have an RV or something like that, how cute would this be to pop in there? This one I love because I have a 5-year-old grandson, and I think he would get a big kick out of this pillowcase. The really fun thing about this pillowcase is that anywhere you see the white color, like in the eye or the stars or in their ears or whatever, that is actually glow-in-the-dark fabric. And we have that fabric at the store, and we love it. Or if you've got somebody who is like my granddaughter, a cutie pie, I think this will be a perfect little gift for her as well. So again, you're able to make these and tailor them to the people you're giving them to. I want to remind you that there are 3 sizes that I have found for travel pillows: a 12 by 16, a 13 by 18, and a 14 by 19. And I believe that this pillowcase size will work with all of those sizes. So check that out. So again, the size is 12 by 16, 13 by 18, and 14 by 19. And I believe that most sewing stores have those, or as always, you can find stuff on Amazon. So anyway, I hope you have enjoyed my little travel pillowcase tutorial. And till next time, happy stitching.